Well, welcome back to yet another exciting episode of The Hybrid Disciple. I'm one of your hosts, Andy. I'll be joined by Ashley in just a few moments. And man, we have a conversation for you today. Now, of course, you're logging into a podcast or you're watching this on YouTube or, you're doing something and you're expecting a conversation. Of course, that's what the Hybrid Disciple is. We talk about the bridge between digital and physical discipleship. We talk about going from digital to physical. We talk about actually making sure that we can communicate who Jesus is in both a digital and physical realm. That's the hybrid nature of things. But this conversation today is a little bit more interesting than I think we're letting on here. And I'm hoping I'm tantalizing your podcast taste buds just a little bit. This conversation is with a good friend of Ashley's. His name's Joey Papa. Joey is the host of the Failed Christian podcast. He's got an amazing YouTube channel with all sorts of content there, from anxiety to talking about herbal supplements and how Jesus is moving in all of it. He is a video producer. He is a content director. He is just an amazing, amazing guy. And this conversation gets into a little bit of why he does what he does. See, Joey is also the moderator of a gigantic Facebook community, and he's really the pinnacle of what it means to be a Christian who flamed out, so to speak, and then has been brought back by the grace and love of Jesus. And in the midst of all of that, he found that discipleship in a digital capacity is not only readily available to all of us, but is actually a way to grow. And this conversation is one of those that really left me impacted, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So without further ado, let's get rid of my blabbing. Here's our conversation on the Hybrid Disciple with Joey Papa.
Yeah, my name is Joey. I have been a content creator ever since I was a child, with the camcorder, VHS, making movies in my basement when I was 8 years old. Professionally, I'm a video producer, do a lot of commercial work, also nonprofit video work. And then part of my passion project has always been YouTube, TikTok, and then I started a podcast called The Failed Christian about 18 months ago, which has been really a wild ride. Got a lot of good responses. I thought I was going to get a lot of criticism, but it's one of those things. If you're not a fan, you're not a fan right away. So I don't think I got too much criticism because of that. It's pretty polarizing. I've been following Jesus since I was 9. I always say that I knew God before I knew about God. I was a pretty depressed, suicidal kid, and knew the loving arms of a father that I could not see since I was that young. My faith has taken many turns, challenges, ups and downs throughout the years. I'm now almost 45, so it's been a long and wild ride with Jesus. But he is the man. Like, I don't know how else to put it. Like, I seriously, even this past summer, I felt like I had the only way I could put it is a love affair with God again. And I'm someone who has always been very drawn to the mystics, the Catholic mystics in particular, because of their romantic language when it comes to God. And I would dare say that maybe I am a mystic. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me. I got 4 kids. I live in Tampa, Florida. Been through quite a bit of traumatic events in my adult life. Didn't have too many traumatic events earlier on, but as I got older, a lot of shit has happened in my life, which has actually really taught me a lot about myself, about God, about people. And so things that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but at the same time, very grateful that I was able to go through those things for the lessons that I've learned.
For those that don't know Joey, so right before we hit record, I was kind of gushing. I've been a longtime admirer. Actually, I've been through a lot of stuff in my adult life, not necessarily in my kid life, but in my adult life, addiction and all the things that go along with that. And one of the things that drew me to Joey in particular, and his not only his social media but also his YouTube, which is great. He does a lot of like shorter clips, not like the 15-minute type clips, but like the 7 to 9 minute clips about a whole lot of things, from substances to anxiety. And that's actually the thing that I glommed onto, was you particularly we're talking a couple months back about Jesus and anxiety. And that was one of the things that I remember watching and going like, oh, this dude gets it. Like this dude gets it, which then led me to start listening to Failed Christian. And Ashley was gushing about you a couple months back. And so we're really stoked to have you on the program, and I'll stop fangirling now and turn it over to Ashley.
So Joey and I have known each other for many, many, many years. We were both interns at the Honor Academy at Teen Mania Ministries in Lindale, East Texas, like back in the late 90s. And I was there on campus. He, when I met him, was on tour with the Acquire the Fire ministry team. But Joey, you've always just like radiated a very, I would say, and whether it was true or not, because, you know, whenever you're like 18, 19, 20 years old, like, are you really as confident as like you appear to be? But you were always very much like, you just radiated this like individual confidence. And so, obviously I took a crazy path and went one direction, didn't talk to you for many years. You went another direction. And then, we reconnected on social media a few years ago. I actually wanted to hire him to work for an aerospace company I was working for, and that just didn't pan out, but it reconnected our friendship. And then he hit me up and said, hey, I have this crazy idea. I want to launch this podcast called The Failed Christian. And he was like, and I would really be honored if you would be the first guest. And it was funny because whenever he hit me up, he was like, because like your story, yeah, it's like you pretty much failed at being a Christian, like in epic proportions.
Yeah, you were like the poster child of the failed Christian in my mind.
Congratulations.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, you know, like, Ashley, you failed epically. Come talk about it. And I did. And it has been an honor it was an honor to participate. I've been on his podcast a couple of times. But also, and the reason, you know, that I feel like the failed Christian is so important now in this day and age is because I feel like we're really in this kind of era where deconstruction is very much a thing. Whenever you're discipling people specifically, you have to recognize that there's so many different situations and church trauma and all of these things that may factor into a person's concept of God, concept of faith, right? And so with Hybrid Disciple, really kind of the premise of this podcast is how do we merge online discipleship with brick and mortar? How do those things communicate with one another? And one of the things that I admire so much about Failed Christian specifically is your online Facebook group. And so before we get too far into that, just tell us a little bit about what the premise of Failed Christian podcast and really what your heart was behind it whenever you created it.
Yeah, so the Failed Christian's tagline is conversations with messed up people working out their faith. So I wanted to create a open space for people kind of like me who love God, follow Jesus, but aren't afraid or don't really have a place to talk about all of the questions and the doubts and the screwed up stuff, the things that are pretty much shunned within typical Christian culture. And what came to the genesis of it was I had just gone through, I lost a child at 3 years old, and then my son got cancer 3 years after that. Right before he was diagnosed, my wife left me. And so I was in the shittiest shithole I had ever been in my life. I was suicidal, very depressed, and kind of went off the rails for a while. I was in so much pain that I was just fiending for anything that would make me feel better, from alcohol to nicotine to other substances like kratom, which is an herbal supplement that has opioid-like properties. It's legal, but it's very addictive. And just really never left God. Like, I love God. Like, I would never leave him, honestly. Like, he's the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. But it was almost like all this stuff that I've always believed didn't feel like it was working, quote unquote. And so it was almost like, if I could put it this way, like Jesus is on the couch. Do you know what I mean? Like, God is like, you know, I'm like, I love you. I just don't know. I don't know anything right now. Like, I feel like I don't even know myself. And it was crazy because during some of the darkest times, or some of the most, what I would perceive myself as being the most rebellious times, being drunk off my ass in the back of my car for 3 hours when I'm supposed to be at work, which I'm like ultra responsible person. You know what I mean? So like, to me, that was like, oh, I'm in deep shit right now, because I don't even care about going to work. Like, that's crazy. Which led then to me sleeping around with a bunch of guys. I had always been attracted to both genders, but I was a virgin when I got married. I was very open with my then wife, throughout our whole marriage, all that stuff. But I got to this point of so much pain and loneliness that I was like, fuck it. I'm getting on Grindr. I'm going to hook up with guys. I've never done it. I want to do it. Probably not the safest or wisest thing to do in life. But I did it. And during that time, my mental health severely declined. I was a mess during those 6 weeks of my Grindr escapades. And then at the end of those 6 weeks, I just like fell on my knees before God. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I am just like going crazy, like in my head, and I was driving in the car, bawling my eyes out because I could feel the love and the warmth and the grace of God on me, him just like hugging me, like embracing me. And I just like said to him, I'm like, God, I am such a fucked up Christian. I am such a failed Christian. I have failed in every way that I would have never dreamt of when I was 19 years old, And then as soon as I said that out of my mouth, I was like, hey, that's a great podcast. And I felt just the like inspiration to pursue that. It was never, I never like, I guess I threw around the idea at some points in my life. Oh, it'd be cool to do a podcast. But now I had like this drive. It almost felt like, I don't want to use the word calling, but something like it felt like I got to do this. And so that was the genesis of it. Just to really have those types of conversations, saying things that people want to say in the church world, but are afraid to say, and having people on the podcast that have had similar experiences. My number one type of guest that I look for is someone that has majorly screwed up and they found themselves falling into grace. That's the prerequisite. They fell into grace instead of falling into condemnation and judgment and God's pissed at you. They found grace. And that's because that's what happened to me. I found another level of God's grace that I was pretty shocked by, to be honest with you, pretty surprised by.
Joey, when in the process of doing this podcast, and we'll get into a little bit of like discipleship and the hybrid discipleship thing that we talk about here, but in the process of doing this podcast, have you come up against any stories of people that have been identifying with certain realms of life that God is not calling them to, and kind of how have you been pulling them out of that, so to speak?
I'd say a lot. There's quite a few guests that were in the full-time ministry in the traditional sense. Some of them failed miserably, like, through affairs or embezzling money or whatever, that fell into grace. So a lot of them, and they're now in a very, like, they would probably say that they're in such a much more freeing, well-balanced, even more authentic relationship with God. But I wouldn't say that it's not like, I don't think I've walked anyone through, coming away from more of a traditional way of doing church. I've had people that are more post, do you know what I mean? They've kind of walked through that. I do think a lot of the listeners are very hungry for an alternative. I would say probably half of my listeners are people who I call them the displaced. They love God. They love Jesus. They're fully committed. They don't really care about deconstruction. Some of them do, which is great. I mean, I don't care if you deconstruct or not. I don't have an opinion on that. But most of them are like, no, this is the faith. This is my faith. This is what I want. But they have nowhere to go. They don't know where to go. They don't want to go to traditional church because they've been hurt or screwed over by it, or they feel like that it's all a sham. And so I'd say that would be more of the type of people that I've spoken with and talked to, behind the scenes, if you would, doing some consulting and things along those lines.
I feel like that opens up a conversation that the church, capital C church in America specifically needs to really have. And that is, what are we doing to reach those displaced? So whether they're churched or unchurched, to use the terminology that people like to use, what are we doing? Because I feel like there really isn't many churches that do that well. It's like you either have ministries and outreach and small groups and all these things for people who are really, really focused on being part of community and church in a very traditional sense, or you have something that's kind of like the opposite pendulum, kind of like what I do with 12, which is like non-traditional in every aspect and way. And so like that middle ground, finding a place where people are able to be like, I recognize some of the traditional cadence here that makes me feel comfortable because it's what I know and what I believe is like the correct way to do church. But I don't necessarily want to go there because I'm afraid that if I tell somebody, that I really, really struggle with my mental health, or that I have gone on a Grindr or Tinder binge and am sleeping with a million people, or whatever, all of the things that we all kind of do sometimes and hide. There's like, how do we reach those people well? And I think that the first step is churches and church leadership need to have honest conversations about what people are genuinely going through, and kind of step away from this mindset and this ideology that, like, if they come to church that they're good, because we all know that that's not true, right? We know that in a church of 1,000 people, you have 1,000 different stories and 1,000 different dynamics of people who are really trying to work through something, and everyone's something is different. But I don't feel like, and I've been on staff at multiple churches, I don't feel like I have ever heard that conversation happen among leadership in church. It's not like we sit down and say, yeah, we have amazing youth ministry, we have great church, we have singles ministry, we have this, we have that. But do we have a ministry that's like, hey, if you're really screwed up and you're like super struggling, like, meet us on Tuesday night at Starbucks because we're going to just love you and talk about it. Like, that doesn't really exist. Which brings me to your Facebook group specifically. So the hybrid, or the failed Christian Facebook group, is every time I go on there and I get notified, I participate in it a lot. So every time I get notified that somebody has commented or whatever, I go in and I read. And first and foremost, what I would say is it is probably one of the most grace-filled communities that I have ever witnessed on the internet. Because you have people who are like staunch, super conservative, like by the book, quintessentially like Christ followers who like, dabble in the law a little bit, that like have their like hardcore, like this is the right way beliefs. And then you have people who are like,
and those are the ones that make me the most nervous, by the way.
Yes. Yes. And then you have the people who are like atheists now, who may have been a Christian at one time, that's like, screw God, I don't want to have anything to do with him. And then you have people that are like, I don't really know. And then you have people that are like, I love Jesus, but I'm definitely going on a bender this weekend. Like, you have basically the gamut of religious ideologies and faiths in that space. And people will post questions like with so much transparency and authenticity. They will comment on each other's, offering like thoughts and opinions and advice. But very rarely do I see anyone becoming just unhinged on there, like, which can so often happen on Facebook groups. You have Tom in freaking Des Moines that's like going crazy, saying the horrible things to somebody because they have a different opinion.
Yeah, that guy's nuts.
So whenever we're talking,
they won't last.
Well, right.
First of all, because they go bye-bye real quick. I'm very, very strict about
the band hammer out.
We can disagree, but you got to be respectful and honorable. If you start getting shitty and an asshole, bye. Go find a different group.
Right. So that's kind of to that point, because I feel like there's a lot of churches that are becoming more and more aware that they need to create these online communities because people feel safe behind keyboards. Like for the good or the bad, they feel real safe behind keyboards. But it can open up from a ministry perspective such an amazing opportunity to first get a pulse of what's really going on in your community. So if you're a church and you have a really solid online presence and you are able to form a community where people are just being honest like that and having honest dialogues, that gives you so much genuine insight into the pulse of what's really going on in your congregation. But what I want to ask you is, how do you maintain that level of positivity? I don't mean like warm fuzzy, because there's some there's some hard conversations that go down in there. It's not like a warm fuzzy environment.
Right.
People ask some really grimy questions, but how do you first off, foster that environment from an advice perspective of a church that may be wanting to do something like that? How do you foster that? And then how do you police it? And like, what's that line when you're like, okay, you got to go, buddy. Like you're too much. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think in church environments as well as in the Facebook group, it's the same thing. It's what's modeled. I think vulnerability begets vulnerability, grace begets grace. Like, so the way in which I present and put my own shit out there, and then even, the way that I respond to people when I mean, there's some people who write in there that I'm like, oh God, please, would you please take that back? I don't want other people to feel, like weird or whatever. Again, those ultra conservative ones. But I think that, the way in even responding to them is in a way of understanding and grace. It's like seeing where someone is at, and not that I'm in like a better place, but just recognizing, okay, this is where they're at. This is their worldview. This is how they're seeing themselves, God, whatever, and challenging them, provoking them in thought without attacking them. Right. It's like keeping it about the ideology more than it is about that person who's speaking the ideology. And I always like to I tend, even on TikTok, to always bring things back to the teachings of Jesus. Right. So, because to me, that's kind of like, it's like the safe ground, right, for everyone, no matter where you land on it all. Now, unless you're an atheist or something else, you've left the faith, that's different. But for Christians that are a wide variety of people, it's like I always like to use different parables or teachings or the way that Jesus ministered, because his way of ministry was so like concentrated. Like there's a very distinctive way in which he ministered. And most people, when you use teachings of Jesus, they don't dispute it. They may say, well, I don't really see it that way or whatever, but like it is what it is. You know what I mean? And like, and I see it as like my own kids, in my own house. I have the tendency, like every other parent, to want to dominate or, configure things so that the kids are just doing the things that I want them to do or expect them to do. But I have to always put into practice, no, like I want to have a safe environment where my kids will say and do and ask the questions that in that more controlled, contrived environment where they're trying to please dad, they would never, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of like the same thing, but I do think a lot of it does come from the top down leadership, whatever, setting that expectation. And I do think that that's kind of one of the big issues in the modern popular Christian culture, church, whatever, is the reason why a lot of these issues aren't addressed or talked about is because it would, in essence, force the leadership to face those things within themselves. And I don't know if a lot of them are ready or willing even to do that. You know what I mean? All of us have parts of ourselves that are ugly and twisted and whatever. And I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding. Like this past few years, but this year in particular, there have been so many huge ministers that have fallen, or like, just shit has come out. And I think it's telling of a dishonest culture. That's really what it is. It's a dishonest culture that's been fostered within the church, where, people's failings or their temptations, their drawings, their whatever, is seen as wrong. And so therefore they keep it to themselves. So I really do think it comes from yeah, it comes from whoever's leading that thing. You know what I mean? Like that's really who sets the standard. And those that do get, I have a very, very low tolerance for mistreating people. And so sometimes I will message someone if they do that and kind of give them a warning or a slap on the wrist, if you would, in a kind way. But there's other times it's like, no, there's no way. Like they crossed the line. Do you know what I mean? You go find a different group, basically. So yeah, it's just about the way we treat one another. Really, is what that line is for me.
You and I have, I mean, both Andy and Joey. We've talked about this many times, but I say all of the time that the power of God is found in the messiness of humanity. And the minute that you hide the messiness of humanity, you're essentially hiding the power of God. You know, some people push back and say, we can't hide the power of God, but you can really. Because if you don't allow people to see the transformation that happens within you through your relationship with God, then people think that you've just arrived mysteriously at this like holy place. And that's just not how it works. And so I feel like whenever it comes to discipleship specifically, one of the most powerful things about discipling people is that transparency and that vulnerability and being able to say, like, I get where you're at because I've been there, and this is how you walk out of that. This is the process that I went through, and your process may look a little bit different, but just know that it is possible. Like, it is possible to get a handle on your anxiety and the mental component of what you're struggling with. It is possible to stop, having meaningless casual sex with random people from the internet. Like, these things are possible, but if you don't ever talk about the fact that you've struggled with that, then essentially people are like, well, you don't even know. And your ego and your pride is so tied to the version of you that you want people to believe.
Yes.
That then you don't even allow the power of God to be evident in your life because you would rather appear perfect than processed.
That goes to the culture of being dishonest as well. I think there's an interesting thing that happens when I'm writing a message actually we're at Lux, we're tackling, like, over this year, we're tackling the things that the actual church doesn't want to talk about. So like, this month we've been kind of setting up some things about church, but we're tackling mental health. We're going to talk revelation. We're going to talk sex and sexuality. We're going to talk identity. We're going to talk all those things that it kind of sounds like, oh, the brick and mortar church this is too hot to handle, stuff like that. Like, we're shock jocks, and that it's not it. It's we have a huge Discord server and a community full of people that are de-churched mostly. I mean, there are some that have no clue about Jesus, but mostly de-churched. They've gone through the system. They've been hurt by the church. And a lot of the things that myself and Mark, the lead pastor, have to deal with are our own egos and our own personas of, like, trying to be superheroes to help fix things. And, like, I'm just as broken as y'all on this call, and I'm just as broken as everybody in that Discord. And I choose to mask it by drinking a lot of coffee and staying up late and having a lot of conversations with people and, making myself feel better because I can't deal with the own kind of crap that's been going on in my soul for the last however many umpteen years. Joey, when Ashley asked that question of, like, how are you protecting yourself? I was watching your face intently, and you got this kind of wry smile on your face. And I'm curious about that. Like, do you struggle with that? Is that a day-to-day struggle for you? Is that one of those things like, no, I'm pretty salted in this. Like, I know exactly what I'm doing. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Oh, well, yeah, I think I'm a mental mess most days, but I would say that brutal honesty has been my best friend in life. It is this most scary, terrifying, butt-clenching thing that I have fallen into and found, but it is what has brought me the most freedom, and it's what keeps me grounded. These past few months, I've gone through a huge financial crisis at this point, is what I feel like it is. And for the longest time, I just was trying to deal with it on my own, push through, didn't want to reach out to friends and let them know, didn't want to let my parents know. And at the end of the day, it really was all pride. Do you know what I mean? Like, I really should have let people know earlier than that. And I saw that even in my own self of, like, my motive in not telling people was because I didn't want to look like a failure. I didn't want to look like, actually I didn't want to look like the thing that I believe about myself to be true. I have huge imposter syndrome. And so I've been doing video production for 14 years. I still get on a shoot and I'm like, in my back of my head, I'm like, they're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? I'm like, what the hell? Like, Joey, you could do this with your eyes closed and you still feel anxious that someone's going to like think that you don't know what you're doing. You know what I mean? It's like so dumb, but I carry that. And so the same thing with the financial, but about a month ago, I just drug it out. I did not want to. I was very resistant, like that child who will not move inside. And I reached out to a few close friends and it was just causing me so much anxiety. Again, it's anxiety because there's dissonance. Mm-hmm. I'm not wanting to accept a reality and then confess that reality to someone else. And so for me, that's really what it boils down to, is brutal honesty. I have learned to embrace being uncomfortable and vulnerability. I always tell people, if your palms are not sweating, your butt cheeks are not clenching, and you don't feel that pit in your stomach, you're not really being vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Like, vulnerability is not just disclosing, and it's not just being transparent. It is like when you feel like you have your pants down and you're saying, this is what's going on, And so that's a hard thing to master. And I wouldn't say I've mastered it. It's just that the reward of being vulnerable, now I've tasted of that, and I want that reward more than I care about the pain or the discomfort to actually go there and do it. And I think I lived so much of my Christian life, my adult life specifically, of trying to maneuver myself, you know what I mean? So that I was never found out. What I was found out about, I don't know. It's just this constant sense of like guilt that like I have something I'm hiding and I don't know what it is. And if someone really gets to know me, they're going to reject me or whatever it is, that type of thinking. And so I would say that's really what it is. I mean, I definitely don't feel like I've, arrived anywhere, or there are times I'm confident, but I think the true confidence for me comes from a place of humility. Like, every time I have observed myself being confident, truly confident, it's because I recognize I like everyone, whoever you are, whether you're some 17-year-old or 75-year-old, or you're a churchy person, everyone has something to offer me. Like, I don't have it all figured out. Even that ultra conservative person, they have something that I can humble myself. And if my ears were open, I can actually hear and grow and listen and, connect on a deeper level. So to me, that's in my life where I've seen real confidence. I think the other side of things is when I feel insecure, and then pride, arrogance, puffing up, which is not confidence. It's actually really like unattractive in people in general, and definitely to myself about myself. So
if a church specifically, if they were wanting to start a ministry that was predominantly online in an attempt to build an online community to get people to physically go to church, so kind of a net, if you will, what kind of advice would you give to the pastor that was in charge of that whenever it comes to A, having hard conversations, and B, creating an online community that's just safe?
That person just needs to be fully authentic and not afraid. That's just it. Like, for me, I meet so many people in my life. I recently started talking to this one dude. My friend put me in touch with him. He's his brother. His wife left him suddenly. And so that's why I put him in touch with me, because he didn't have anyone really to talk to. I don't know this guy from anyone. And so in our conversation, I was trying to figure out, like, okay, where's he at? Like, what frame of reference are we coming from? And so I was like, oh, were you and your wife, were you Christians? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, no, definitely not. I want nothing to do with that. And I told him, I was like, that's cool, man. I was like, I don't give a shit where you're at. I just wanted to know, like, so for context reason, I think there needs to be that disposition of like, all are welcome. Nobody's here to sell you anything. We're not here to trick you into anything. Like, people, when they feel safe, they will latch on. Everyone is looking for a safe place. And so, having a place of openness and no judgment or whatever, at the end of the day, even when people are in my life and I know they're in my life, that God has placed them in my life to share the love of Christ with them, I trust God way more than I trust me or them or whatever. So like, I never get in the weeds with people. Like, I don't like arguing and debating and all of that stuff. It's just being really who I am. And because there was a large part of my life where if I was among the world or unbelievers or whatever, I would almost have this weird shame. I'd feel embarrassed that I was a Christian. Like, I didn't want people to know that because of what Christians are in people's eyes, right? It wasn't that I was ashamed of Jesus, but I've gotten to this place now where it's like, he is so integrated into my life. He's so real to me that like, he's just a part of my story. And so if I become friends with someone, like, they're going to know that, right? Because it's just who I am. And I don't feel at all anymore ashamed or afraid or embarrassed, even if they do perceive, Christians a certain way. Well, that's not who I am. Do you know what I mean? They're going to discover that as we walk together. So I think people want to be heard. People want to be seen. People want to tell people what is going on in them, right? I drive Uber on the side because of my financial crisis. And it's crazy. I'd say 90% of the people get in my car have a wall up. And my insecurities perceive that and interpret that as, oh, they just want to be left alone. They don't want to talk. But I force myself, hey, how's it going? Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. Make small talk. And then there's always that moment where that wall starts coming down. You can feel it in the car. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And people tell me the craziest things, you know what I mean? And more than once, people have gotten out of my car and been like, man, it is so good just to talk to someone. And I was like, well, I'll charge you for that. Like, I'll send you my therapy bill. People are hungry. I don't care where you are, what religion you are, what philosophy you live your life by. Like, that is what we want as humans. So I think if I was, if someone put me in that position, my main objective would be to create that space where people feel the freedom to speak and to be heard and validated and seen for their humanity, to be seen for the gift that they are, because we do not have that in our world. Like, that is not part of our society. That's not even part of the church most of the time. It's like, I feel like that would be a magnet for people if you're talking about a net, So yeah, that would be my thought on that.
So like, let's move to your Facebook group then. How do you do that if you have, the anonymity, quote unquote, of keyboard warriors? How, in your own heart, in your own ministry and in your own walk, how do you square that with, well, I need to see this person face to face or else I don't, the anonymous is just cut out of my life? Like, where do you see things getting fine tuned in that?
Yeah. Well, first, for me, I always have to use a lot of discernment in comments, if you would. And I would relate this more to TikTok than I would even my Facebook group, because TikTok, is hot and heavy with the commenters
all the time.
And so
it can get grimy. Yeah.
Yeah. I sent out an email the other day and from my email list, and I got one back. Someone replied. It's like, "Fuck you, get out of my life." I was like, okay. And this is someone I had met with previously. So this list of email were people that I had a consultation with. So this isn't just some random no-name person. I don't know who they are personally, but I showed my son. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what, you got to deal with when you're online or whatever. I know email's not really online, but the point is that there are so many comments and so many conversations I enter in with. And as soon as it crosses the line into attacking, I don't even comment back. I want to, trust me. Everything in me wants to be like, well, blah, 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 but it's so, I don't like things that are not productive and that feel futile. They just feel like you're spinning your wheels. You're just flapping your gums. So I would avoid me personally, I avoid all of those. I don't care, whatever. But those who are open, even if we don't agree, it's always questions all the time. That to me, and we see that in Jesus, right? Something like he answered 4 questions, but he asked over 180 or something like that. Now, don't quote me on that. It's something along those lines. But questions are the way to people's hearts, because it unlocks something. And as soon as you engage them to think and answer a question, they begin to give you more information that you weren't even asking for, and it gets them to dig deeper as well. So I think in the comment world, it's all about that. And sometimes when they do answer back, then I do offer something. You know what I mean? I don't give another question. But again, I always like to keep myself tethered to the teachings of Jesus, just because they are what they are, you know?
Yeah, that's really good advice, because if you are going to have a productive online community, and I don't even think it matters so much where online, but TikTok for sure. Making sure that I think first, people like to feel like you are interested in them and interested in their point of view. And so the question tactic definitely there's wisdom in that for sure. And then additionally, I feel like, especially whenever you're trying to build relationship with people, so often, ministry minded people we have this thing that we want them to have, right? And so we get excited and we like try to get them to just get on board, because we know that if they just would, that their life would be so much better. But without taking the time to ask those questions, you're making a whole lot of assumptions, and you are, potentially pushing buttons that are traumatic for them and all kinds of things. So taking the time to ask those questions is really key. And then I would also say that any organization that's wanting to build an online community, you do have to, every time I get on TikTok after I've posted a video, I literally have to just take a second and like brace myself for whatever is going to come up in that comment section. Because I mean, I get all kinds of things, crazy stuff. And partially it's because my so much of what I talk about, is rooted in like sexual history, et cetera, because of my past, right? So then I get crazy stuff in my DMs from men, and like, I mean, just the crazy comes out. And so to your point, I think that they're also, whoever is going to fill that role for whatever organization it is, you have to recognize that you need somebody in that space who is capable of like, woosah, like tempering themselves. In fact, even last week, Andy and I had a meeting, and I told him, I'm like, I'll be right back, because I had gone keyboard warrior on someone. They had said something snarky to me, and I'm like, I got time today. So it's not even, and I had to go back and delete the comments. I'm like, I'll be right back. Like, I can't.
Been there, done that.
Like I can't be going off on this person. And even though like I was like, I got a good hour to put this person in their place. We can go back and forth. Like, it'll just boost the algorithm. That's what I tell myself. It'll just boost. And I'm like, no, Ashley, you're not representing Jesus in a very positive light right now, like commenting on their lack of grammatic skill and their intelligence level. Like, today is not the day, so go delete that. So I would say that everything that you're saying is on point, but also making sure that if you are a church or a ministry that's really wanting to build that community, you've got to make sure that whoever is doing the day in, day out, engaging with the online people, whether they're anonymous or not, has to be somebody that is capable of checking themselves and being like, they don't know you. This is what I tell myself all the time. Ashley, they don't know you. They don't know you. They've never met you. They're probably never going to see you in real life. They are making a snap judgment off of a 90-second snippet, and they are attacking someone from their past, or even maybe their present, that they have associated on a subconscious or even conscious level with you, and that's who they're attacking. And so having like the wisdom and the discernment to be like, they're not even after me, just set that down, And Andy, as a digital pastor, you probably can speak a little bit into that space.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can speak a lot into that space. We don't have time in the podcast here, but like the amount of times that I have opened Apple Notes and typed in something that I'm going to type back with the filter of like, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make sure, I'm going to come back in a couple hours and make sure this is what I really want to send. And I think maybe out of 50 times that I've done that, I've sent 48 of them. I've posted 48 of those comments, maybe less than that. The idea that we're kind of stepping into this, and maybe it's because of our age, but that our digital persona is different than our physical persona, and we're allowed to be somebody digitally versus somebody physically. I've got a 19-year-old son and a 17-year-old daughter, and they don't see it that way, which I think is refreshing, but also terrifying, that they can just kind of blend seamlessly in and out of these things to the point of like, there are times I don't actually know how to talk to them in that respect, where I can tell them my Apple Notes trick of like, hey, you saw your former best friend down at Gasparilla and she was wearing that thing that you probably think that she shouldn't have been wearing. And you could have posted that one comment that you posted about how nice you look. But really, I know you wanted to post that thing about like, you look like a slut and all these other things. And I could tell her the Apple Notes trick, but she's not going to get it because she's just going to go, well, what's the point of that? That this is all one thing, right?
Well, as we head to wrapping up our hour from I guess, Joey, if you have any thoughts on just discipleship in general and how you feel like ministries and people, because there's a lot of Christian influencers and people that are genuinely Christ lovers who are discipling people, whether they would call it that or not. Like, what advice or like just thoughts would you give to people who are stepping into that space, whether it's as an influencer or as an intentional church or leader or, whatever it is, like what is discipleship online specifically? And like, how do you think the church should be leveraging it from like a big picture perspective?
That's an interesting question. Some university up north reached out to me. I don't know how they found me. I'm not like this big influencer or anything like that, but they're doing research on Christianity on social media. And he asked me a similar question. And one of the things that came out of me that I hadn't really thought about before, but I am very convicted about it, that came out during that interview was we have to keep in mind that anything in the digital space is a public forum. Mm-hmm. You're not sitting at your kitchen table with someone that that you have history with, that they know you and they know where you're coming from. They know the context of your life. So the things that are said online, and I had to grow in this. This is actually a conviction that I had personally from when I first started The Failed Christian on TikTok that I have now moved away from. I was, kind of speaking pretty boldly about certain qualms I have with the church. But I'm like, Joey, this is going to strangers. Like, you're not talking to a church. You know what I mean? You don't know who you're talking to. This could be anyone. And so I think it's really keeping that in mind, is that digital anything really is a front porch, right? It's not the living room. It's not the dining room. It's not the basement. Like a lot of, and I think there's a time and a place. I know there are creators out there that talk about like different theological perspectives and things like that. And it's very educational, and I don't have any problem with that. That's fine. But some of the things that are talked about that I see very common, online on social media, specifically in Christianity, those topics really need to be talked about with someone that and they know you, and it's like a personal, intimate relationship, not on, because we can easily be misrepresenting, or at the very least being misunderstood by the general public because they don't have the context of Christianity or the church. They were raised in the church or whatever. And so it could be very messy. The other thing is I think honoring everyone, right? So I think obviously there is a line. You don't have to tolerate people being unkind and unjust and rude or assholes or whatever. That is for sure. But at the same time, I think having a culture of honor is so important. One of my favorite things to do on TikTok is to go on these lives of people who walked away from the faith and just hang out there and listen and whatever. And then I usually pop in and ask a few questions. And the one dude recently was on his live, and he's very, very angry and adamant against Christianity. And of course, there was all of the typical Christian comments in there, like, you never knew Jesus, or you're standing in God's judgment, and all this stuff. And so I popped in and I said, if you had one message in your life that you want people to know, what would it be? And he obviously it took him back, and he had to think about it for a minute. He's like, that Christianity is a scam. And I was like, oh, that's a weird thing to live by. But hey, okay, cool. And he went on to this whole rant. Someone else was talking about like God and proof of God. And like, that was his whole thing. Like, you can't prove God. And, so I just asked again, I was like, well, I just chimed in. I was like, hey, do you believe in love? And he was like, yeah, of course I believe in love. And I just left it at that, because in my mind, I'm like, that's enough just to like get his mind thinking. Cause how do you prove love? Like, love is not, scientifically proven, like, you know what I mean? We all experience it, whatever. But I wasn't trying to get this guy I wasn't trying to debate with him and be like, well, if you believe in love, then you have to believe in God and all this. But I love doing that stuff because I feel like I'm there in love. I'm not there to like argue with this dude or try to convince him or try to even defend Christianity. Do you know what I mean? But like, even at the end of it, I was like, all right, man, I got to go shower. Love you, man. Whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I think we want to build bridges. We want to build relationship. We want to build friendship. You know what I mean? And if that dude and I were ever in person together, I know that I could build a friendship with him. And eventually he's going to find out that I am a committed Christian, and it's not going to be a problem for him. Why? Because I have honored him. I've seen him for where he is. I'm not thinking like, oh, you need to be somewhere else, or I'm here to like evangelize you and convince you otherwise. Like, no, we're just going to love one another, period, and walk together. And I'll let the Holy Spirit do the rest. Like, whatever needs to be done will be done. I'm not the one responsible for that. And so those two things I think are really important. Keeping that like reverence that this is a public forum. Be very careful what you say and how you say it, because you're not talking to a church. You're talking to the general public. And two is just that culture of honor and building a bridge and building friendship with people, without any ulterior motive of I'm going to convert them or blah, 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 that type of thing. So that those would be my two like cornerstones that come out of my head right away.
As I listen to Failed Christian podcasts, there's out of all of them. And so for instance, like even the ones on anxiety, because I don't understand anxiety at all. Like, it's just not something I have ever struggled with. Thank God. Like, I don't understand it at all. So I say that I know.
God bless you.
Yeah. My daughter has crippling anxiety. She's on medication for it. But I say that to say, like, as you look at the podcast list, there is not a single podcast on Failed Christian that I've listened to that I have not walked away feeling challenged. And it has taught me something and given me a different perspective. And so, as if you are new to Failed Christian and you go and check it out and you're reading through, I just start from the beginning and listen to all of them, because every single one of them has impacted me in some way. And so I just really appreciate you coming on and always being, one of the things I love about you is I know that you are going to be as open as me. And that's, it's nice to find people who are like, yeah, here's all of my best. Like, here, just have some, and I really respect you for that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.